with that, we will now get into our main topic today. We are talking about yet another version of role-playing games, the 2D20 system from Modiphius. Oh,
And in
Teos is
honor
putting
of
on.
that, since we're going to talk about Star Trek,
I see what you did there. I'm thinking, why is he putting on his Wookiee costume? It's Star Wars. There's no Stars. Oh, he's going to
are
make
they
the Star
different?
Wars Star Trek joke. Yes,
I thought they
yes.
were the same
No,
thing.
yeah, one is good and the other's trash. But I'm not going to say which is which, because that will outrage and or entice
Yeah.
certain members of our audience.
Well, look,
But
when Yoda tells you to go after the Romulans, the first thing you do is grab that blue phone booth and get in it and go
mhm,
straight to the Romulans.
absolutely, every time. This is the way. Anywho, the 2D20 system created by Modiphius Games. And it isn't just one system, it's a lot of systems. And they've built a lot of different games based on this. But like we said in our previous segments, we're doing this because we love 5th edition and we love D&D, but we also love games. We also love all different sorts of games. So we look at other games to inform us about how to play in different ways and maybe borrow, or if not borrow, maybe eschew certain types of play styles
Mm-hmm.
uh, by looking at these other games and figuring out what we love and what we might not like so much. So this 2D20 system is a settingless system, and you can get a quick start. First of all, you can get a system reference document from DriveThruRPG for free that sort of gives you an outline for the system, and it's there to help you build your own games based on the system. You can also get free quick starts for several of the 2D20 games that Modiphius publishes. Star Trek Adventures, Dune, John Carter of Mars, Fallout, Achtung Cthulhu, many, many more games are built with that, and several of them have a 2D20 quick start for free available at DriveThru. So,
Yeah.
Teos, the 2D20 system, without considering their settings, what are the basics?
Yeah, so the and now I should say you know this better than I do because you've written for Star Trek Adventures, whereas all I did is show up on a very fun actual play of Dune. So I know the Dune version pretty well. Um,
Okay.
but the concept is that you're rolling 2d20s and
Mhm.
you have to get a number of successes which are set as the kind of target by the DM of how many successes you need for a situation. And what I like
Mhm.
about that is that that easily encompasses both a very quick thing like, shoot the person, shoot the enemy, or it can be like get this spaceship to work, right? So if you've got to get, your warp drive going so you can get to Alderaan, then all you got to do is get your Wookiee to make a certain number of successes. I'll stop. I'll behave now.
Exactly.
But yeah,
Okay. Teos is being Have from this point forward.
it's the
But
vaccine.
but
It's not me.
exactly. But what he's saying is true. The 2D20 system is based on the idea. Well, I want to step all the way back. So in the
Yeah.
SRD, we get this general text that says the 2D20 system is great for, quote, emulating and celebrating action-packed story-driven fiction, and thrives when paired with a setting or a theme where competent, determined, often larger than life protagonists face tense and perilous situations. And, quote, uh, it benefits collaboration and teamwork being vital to success. And my first thought is, every game's like that, except it's not. There
Yeah.
are many, many more niche games that are
Mhm.
more cerebral, or that there are more about feelings rather than actions.
Yeah.
So I guess this text is relevant, but it's also like every system says this, right?
Yeah.
5e says this, and and Fate says this, and it
Yeah,
seems like every game says this.
though I will say that as compared, at least my Dune experience as compared to say 5e or a lot of other game systems, does have more collaboration and teamwork to it, in that more of your feats, your traits are pushing that concept of, hey, you can get someone to roll a die or otherwise, create an asset or do something that's going to help them. And a lot of it is about explaining why you can use your best dice. It's almost backwards of D&D, where we kind of go like, oh, come on, don't just make the skill challenge with like, I'm going to use my constitution because I'm the best at it. This is saying do that because you are a hero. You are supposed to be very good. You are supposed to drive the fiction. So you explain narratively why you get to use your best skill and your best drive to achieve success. And I think that is kind of neat.
It is. It is. I think 5e does the exact all these things. It may not feel it, right? You might not feel that collaboration is there because of the mechanic of the 2d20 and the counting up of successes,
Yeah.
as opposed to just overcoming one number with one die roll.
Right.
But the teamwork is still there, right? You've got the guidance spell, you've got help, you've got
True.
haste, you've got these things that bardic inspiration, that there does work best when there is teamwork, but it doesn't feel that way because there is less narrative behind it. So in that sense, you are absolutely correct. So what dice do we use in the 2d20 system? You're going to be shocked to find out that mostly you use d20s. and for the most part, at least at the most basic level, you need two of those. You also sometimes use d6s depending on the game if you're rolling on a table. And then they have something called challenge dice, which are still d6s, but these are used to count up damage, to mark progress toward a larger task, or to provide icons. What does that mean? Well, a challenge die for most of the games in the 2d20 system will look like this. One facet of the D6 will have a 1 on it. One will have a 2 on it. Two of the faces will be blank. And then the fifth and sixth face will have like an icon, some sort of special icon. So obviously a 1 means 1 success or 1 point. A 2 means 2. Blanks mean 0. And then the 5 or the 6, the icon means 1 success plus something else happening.
Gotcha.
So that is those are the dice types that you will use. Let's move over to the character side of things for just a second. Most characters in 2d20 games have two categories of things that tell how good they are at different aspects of the game. One is attributes, and the second is skills. So attributes are who you are. Skills are what you are good at doing based on the training that you've had. In the SRD, they give as attributes agility, brawn, coordination, insight, reason, and will.
Sure.
6. We're familiar with 6 attributes.
Yep.
Skills in the base SRD are fight, know, as opposed to knowing, or as example, knowing things, move, operate, survive, and talk.
And
now, every game will then change those.
And I think that's a neat part of this game, in that it doesn't. You look at that list of skills and you're like, oh, that's really very few. But what it's doing is encouraging you to explain how one of these fits, and it should be kind of obvious, but then to give you the room to say, how are you good? Like, yes, it's a fight skill, but how are you good at it? And that's where these focuses come in, which are a big part of your character, is saying that you are focused in this particular area, which will give you that opportunity to get more successes.
Yep. So when you are resolving a task, what happens is the DM will set a difficulty between 0 and 5, and we'll talk about 0 later. 0 being you really can't fail. 1 being Yeah, it's relatively easy, but you still have a chance of failure. 2, 3, 4, up to 5.
And this is the number of
Then
successes, right?
that's the number of successes, the
Mm-hmm.
number of dice that need to overcome the target number that you're shooting for. How do you set the target number? The target number is based on you, your character. So attributes are generally a number between about 8 and 12 is a range that's normal. 12 being quite high, 8 being quite low, but some things like animals trying to reason would be very low. It'd be like 3 or 4. Uh, whereas somebody who's very strong, brawn wise, would be like a 12 or 13. And then your skills generally go from 0 or 1 to 5. So you're going to add your attribute and your skill together to get a target number. So say you're normal around a 10 for your attribute of brawn, and for your skill of fight, you'll have 2. So you're pretty good. You're not 5, but you're not 0. You're
Mm-hmm.
2. That brawn of 10 and a fight of 2 would add up to 12. So on your D20s, you're trying to get 12 or lower. So you're trying to roll low in this game. Obviously, the higher your attribute, the higher your skill, the higher that target number is, making it easier to roll beneath.
Yeah.
Then you roll your 2d20 and you count how many you get below. So if the difficulty is 2, then you would need to roll both of those below your target number.
Right.
However, there are ways to add more dice to your pool. There are also ways to get more than one success on a single die, which we will talk about now. If you get less than the difficulty number, you fail. If you exceed the difficulty number, meet or exceed the difficulty number of successes, then you succeed. For every point that you get a number of successes above the difficulty number, you gain what they call capital M momentum. Momentum is something then that you can spend. So if the difficulty was 1 and I got 3 successes, I would have 2 momentum. You can spend that momentum right away to get additional benefits based on what you've done. You can also pool that momentum and use it later for other skill tests.
Yeah.
We'll go back to the momentum pool in a second, but that gives you the basic
Yeah.
skill task resolution.
And I really like that it feels sort of like a different way of achieving what gumshoe games do, where they let you, spend your dice because you really want to succeed. Momentum helps you. It doesn't guarantee success, but it can really improve the odds of rolling those numbers of successes that you need. And then, of course, if you roll a 1, then you're going to get 2 successes, which is even better.
Yeah. So from here, you could say, well, how do you get a 5 difficulty? How do you succeed on a 5 difficulty? If you roll a 1 on a die, that counts as 2 successes toward the overcoming the difficulty. So if I was only rolling 2d20, but I rolled both 1s, that would count as 4 successes on 2d20. Also, if you are specially trained in something and you are using your focus, so say you have a 10 in brawn and a 2 in fight, but your specialty in fight is using a sword.
Mm-hmm.
You get to then do some special things. One of those special things is if any of those D20 dice meet or are below your skill score, so with a 2 of fight, if I got a 2 or lower on any of those dice, then that would count as 2 successes rather than just a 1. So if you've got a 4 in some skill, if you rolled 4 or lower, as long as you're using your focus or you're using the skill in a way that taps into your focus, then a 4 or lower on a die counts as 2 successes.
Yep.
So right there, you can add successes based on die rolls. However, if you roll a 20, we get to add a mishap. That doesn't mean you fail. You could still succeed having rolled a 20, but the DM gets to add a mishap to the game. A mishap could be something that happens right away, or the DM could bank that mishap, turn it into something called threat that the game master has that can add to the difficulty of encounters or scenes, or the DM can use to make life more interesting for your
Yeah.
characters. So there's a lot going on, but it's still relatively simple and easy to pick up as you go. The last thing I want to say about the skill resolution of a 2D20 game is that there are ways to add more dice to your dice pool. So instead of rolling 2D20s, you can roll up to 5D20s based on other aspects of the game. You can spend momentum to add additional dice to your dice pool. You can look at talents that you have, or in different games have different ways of doing it. But essentially, you can get up to a dice pool of 5d20, which then gives you the opportunity to overcome those 5 difficulty challenges that you might face. I
Yeah.
think that, yeah.
And sometimes if you have a thing that's stepwise, sort of like that example, like, you've got a crashed spaceship and you need to fix the warp drive and the thrusters and the navigation system, you might be allowed to add up successes over several people trying, right? So I'm going to
Mhm.
work on this system. I get 2 successes. Okay, the warp drive's on. Now I got to roll another 2 to get this other thing. Okay, the navigation system's on, and someone else tries another thing. And so you might be able to add successes to an attempt that you're doing through a more complex skill. I forget what they call
Yeah.
that, but
And even if you don't have momentum to use, you can buy momentum by giving the DM threat. So you're paying, it's that currency that we
yeah,
talk about that we see in some games where, all right, I need this success badly. So here I'm going to get momentum by giving the game master threat that the game master will use later to make my life a living hell. But at least I've succeeded right now.
right, yep. When you've got to, and that's neat. I like that
Yep.
ability to say no. This is the thing that's important to me. I'm going to do
Mhm.
this, even though I'm risking it all. And a lot of the narrative, if you think of movies and novels, like, it actually makes a lot of sense that sometimes you do this thing that it's going to hurt you later, but you really got to succeed now.
Mhm. And so we're going to look now at 2 different versions of the 2D20 system. First, we're going to look at Dune, which Teos had mentioned playing, and then we're going to look at Star Trek Adventures because I helped work on that core rulebook and some of the supplements. So,
Yeah.
Teos, tell us what you thought of Dune, Adventuring in the Imperium, which you're
Yeah.
holding up right now.
It is a gorgeous book. It's I like to talk about how pretty Free League is in their books. This is every bit as gorgeous. It really is just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful book. Super, like, if you're a Dune fan, you look at this and it feels like an art book for Dune. Like, it really is gorgeous. Super lovely to look over. The Dune game starts very interestingly with a ton of setting. Like, the first 84 pages is all setting, Shawn. Like,
Mhm.
pretty deep stuff, like really explaining all about it. In fact, if you're a Dune fan, it's kind of nice because it really breaks down a lot of things that just reading the novels, you may not get to sort them into kind of how it all really operates. And so it's kind of neat to read that. It gives you a sort of new take on Dune as a story to look over it.
Mhm.
The rules are pretty close to what you described. A major change is that instead of like this, um, uh, the idea of like your brawn or sort of more like ability scores, what Dune uses as the basic abilities is what's called drive. And so the drive is duty, faith, justice, power, truth. And you can see how that changes this to be a very Dune experience, right? I am all about power, or I'm all about justice, or faith, whatever it may be that motivates me. And so you're combining that drive with your skill. And the skills are battle, communicate, discipline, move, or understand. And that's what's going to drive the number that you need to roll under. There are no challenge dice in the Dune version, so you don't use that. It's otherwise very similar to what's going on otherwise. You often will get to choose your drive and your skills. Sometimes the GM may say, hey, it's really about this particular drive or it's this particular skill. The skill's the more often of the two, the one that more typically a GM will say, well, you're in battle. But then you may be able to say, like, well, but I'm using my faith. Here's why. And the GM can go, okay, yeah, that's great. The same thing as you talked about with momentum, you often have an asset that helps. So when you're doing character creation, you may say that you've got poisons or you've got a blade that you've always practiced with, something like that, and then you can use that as an asset to help you roll more dice. The momentum can do things like create an asset for a scene or create a trait about the scene or situation, which is really neat. And often other characters can assist, so they make their own roll and add to the total number of successes. And then, of course, the focus is really important. And I think those elements, when I played Dune, it really comes together nicely to create that feeling of what your character's doing. So I played a Suk doctor that was sort of a failed doctor, but that wasn't necessarily known by everybody. So I'm kind of like the doctor that failed out but pretends to not have failed out, and I'm actually an assassin. And when we did the actual play, one of the neat things you do in the after the setting section is a setting to create your own house and establish your domain. And we went absurd, as players often do. We made the House of Posh based on the Spice Girls.
Nice.
I don't know how that happened, but once it started happening, it was unstoppable. And so then we all had I was like this assassin doctor that was all about nutrition and nutrients, but of course in a terrible way that's really poisoning you. But yeah, it's neat. And creating a character is really nice in Dune. It's one of those things that truly starts with the concept and says, think through your concept. With that concept, now go in and decide your template that you're going to apply to it. Like, so I went with Suk Doctor, but you could have been a Fremen or a Mentat or a Ben Gesserit sister. And there are archetypes that you can pull from that give you additional definition that you can use from. So I'm a soldier, or I am a teacher, or whatever it might be, athlete, duelist, something like that. And you select traits. So and usually one trait is your role. So like I'm the Duke of the house, right? So you can really go there just like in novels. I'm the weapons master. And the second is more personal, like I'm ruthless or I'm just and wise. Your skills range from 4 to 8. You get a primary at 6, a secondary at 5, and 3 others at 4. So it's sort of very dictated as to how you start. Later you can improve those. And you have some additional points you can add to skills. And you get 4 focuses. Those are those areas that really get to customize what you are specifically about, what you feel like your training is, really lets you put your stamp on the character and the story. 3 total talents, which are kind of like feats, like adrenaline shot to remove an affliction a party member has, or subtle step to sneak more easily. You rank your 5 drives from 8 down to 4, and you create statements, which is kind of neat. So like, for my character, this failed doctor, power was a 6, and for the top 3, you create statements. So I said, the true power comes through change. For justice, the scales of balance require those who will adjust the scales themselves, right? So you just kind of some sort of ethos that can help you role playing. I thought that was a really neat angle. And then you get to choose 3 assets, and that defines how your character is. And I liked it a lot. I thought that was a really nice system for that.
Yeah. The Star Trek Adventures shows you the flexibility of this system and how you can use it in different ways. Because while it still had some of the same things that I talked about originally, or that Teos talked about, being Star Trek, it's much different. First of all, the core book, as Teos said, I'm going to hold up my Star Trek version, is really unique. Just the art and the sort of making it look like the old computer screens that they would use is pretty wild. So it's got black background and then white or lightly colored text, but it's made to look like a computer from Star Trek. So it's just neat aesthetically. I
And
think
wasn't
it
there a
got like,
Borg cube too?
yeah, oh yeah, you could. There are so many supplements for this. There was a Borg cube that had like 4 or 5 different books in it. There are so many supplements for this game. I lost track, like up to and including the Lower Decks supplement, the Lower Decks animated version of Star Trek. There's something for that. There's something for just about every bit of Star Trek trivia out there. And as with Dune, there is so much lore in this. I mean, I was a pretty big Star Trek fan. I knew many of the races, but as I was reading through this book, while I was working on it, reading the drafts of it, I was like, I did not know that. I did not know that. I did not know why the different quadrants were called what they are and who's where and
Speaking of lore
why.
in RPGs,
Yeah. I mean, it was great.
that's awesome.
So there's a lot of that, but it's all intermingled quite well, I think, with the actual rules supplements, with the rules pieces of this. Uh, what are the attributes and the disciplines? So they use attributes like they did in the SRD, but they use disciplines instead of skills. So if you think of Star Trek, right there, you're either command or you're engineering or your security. So they sort of went along those lines. So your attributes are control, daring, fitness, insight, presence, and reason. And your disciplines are command, the con, right? The controls, engineering, security, science, and medicine. So you're getting all of those traditional Star Trek roles as the disciplines. So how do you build your character? I'm glad you asked. They have a life path system where there are 7 steps in this system, and each one gives you either certain traits, values, or focuses, or give you bonuses to your attributes and disciplines. So you start with a 7 in each attribute and a 1 in each discipline. So you're at least a little good at doing all of those things, command, con, etc., because you're a Starfleet officer or a Starfleet member. So you need these. So first you pick your species, and that gives you certain bonuses to attributes, certain traits, values, and focuses.
Like a Mon
Then
Calamari can breathe water.
exactly. So you start with your species, then the environment in which you grew up will give you some bonuses, some other things. Then it was your upbringing, how you were brought up. Then you go to Starfleet Academy. And what do you do at Starfleet Academy? What do you study? What are your specialties? Then you'd make a career choice as the 5th step. Then you have career events, things that happen to you early in your career with Starfleet. And finally, it's the finishing touches, those little things about yourself that make you unique from every other person who would have the exact same things as you. And so with those, you have all your attribute scores and your discipline scores, a bunch of traits, a bunch of values, and then focuses, which you can use to change up those dice pools as you go. It also introduces something called determination. So you start your session with determination, with 1 determination. And you can use that when you're about to roll your dice. So if something is happening that's very important and it is tied to your values or a directive that you have been given for a mission, instead of rolling that extra D20 determination die, you can say, I'm using my determination, and you place it on the table on a 1, which means you automatically succeed with 2 successes.
Oh, wow.
But so that's another bit of currency.
Yeah.
Because Star Trek is, the main characters don't often die in Star Trek, other than Tasha Yar. I'm sure there are other
Whoa,
examples, but for the
spoilers.
most part, yeah, I know. For the most part, they don't die. So this game wants you to succeed, and it gives you the tools to do so. It may be at a cost. It might be at a significant cost, but it's there. And then how does teamwork teamwork, because it talked about teamwork. So how does that bring itself into the game? Characters can assist someone else who's making a skill test. They can roll 1d20 to add to the number of successes. So the main person doing the task can roll 5, and then other people who have the ability to help can roll a d20, and they can use their own numbers based on their own attributes and their own disciplines. Mm-hmm. However, in order to count as a success toward the task, the main person has to get at least one success. So 5 people might be able to help somebody do something, but if that initial person doesn't have at least one success, all the other help goes for naught.
Wow.
And Star Trek does use those dice, those extra dice. I forgot what they're called.
The challenge dice?
Challenge dice, because they use it for things like weapons. So if you shoot somebody with a phaser, you may succeed on the shot, but how much you do depends on those dice that you're rolling. So a very light weapon might only do like 2 challenge dice, whereas a heavy weapon might do 8 challenge dice. And so you roll those, and you can succeed with the shot, but you could just do a glancing blow. If you roll all blanks and only 1, it would only do 1 point of stress. And then there may be a way for someone to soak up that stress damage based on equipment they have or traits that they have. The extra effects, like trying to stun someone, works with those icons I talked about. So you roll the challenge dice. Oh, okay, I got 2, 3, 4, plus I got an icon. So that counts as 1 more. So that's 5. Plus, if the weapon has an extra trait, I get to trigger that extra trait, which could be knock someone down, which could be to wound someone, which could be something based on the weapon. So that's where those extra dice come in. Those challenge dice come in to give it a little more realistic feel of, oh, that was a point blank, perfect shot that did all this damage, or I hit, but it was a glancing blow, and we have to continue from there. But overall, it's a very fun game, and I think in its own way, the 2D20 system does a good job of capturing the feel for the games that it is twisted to fit into. There was a Fallout game going on at Origins. I was running Star Trek. There was a Fallout game next to me, and they were having a blast, and you could tell they were using a different version of the 2D20 system. Based specifically on that, because that's all about like surviving and gaining resources and doing that thing. So the game was focused more in that way. It was more about the equipment you could grab rather than the things that you were particularly good at.
That's cool. Yeah. I'm very impressed with how different each system is, but within the general categories, right? You can see that abilities, attributes, drives, skills, disciplines, it's a bit of renaming. It's a bit of changing, but even things that like the points will be different, right? What the points, like you were describing how everybody starts with 7 and then you add numbers, whereas in Dune, it's between 4 and 8, and so they're lower, but it's because but then you get more ways to boost them probably, and so there's some interesting different pieces that they tweak to create the particular story experience, which is really neat.
I think the one thing that I've noticed I've run Star Trek a few times. I've never played it with like the super experienced 2D20 game master, which is one way that you learn how to run a game. So I was just running it based on first my knowledge of a incomplete draft of the game, and then of a complete draft of the game that has had some errata and that I haven't played in a couple of years. It is like any game with that currency, it takes some experience to learn how to use it and when to use it. Because as I was running Star Trek, it felt like the players always had 6 momentum points to spend if they wanted to. And my threat pool never seemed to have enough to really do anything. And when I could, it didn't feel as fulfilling to me as it could have. And part of it that was just my inexperience running the game. But I think for the game to reach its full potential, you have to have someone game
Mm.
mastering who is experienced with using that currency to its maximum effect, both mechanically and story wise.
Yeah, I could see that. Sure, sure. Yeah. Hmm.
But that's my experience with the 2D20 system. And when I first saw it, I was like, this is really cool. I need to use it. And then life got in the way. And
Sure.
then I went back and like relearned it for Origins. I'm like, oh, this is cool. We need to use this for a game. And then life. And now I'm looking at it again and going, boy, I really wish there was, you know,
Yeah.
a game that was perfect for what I'm interested in that uses
Mhm.
this system. And I'm sure I will never touch it until the next thing comes up that work related have to
Yeah.
do.
Well, I'm guessing they will do more with the system because it does seem like it's a very flexible system, and they seem to understand how to make it flexible. Um,
Mhm.
I I've noted that they have a few good Dune source books, but there is a ton of Star Trek. Like Star Trek's definitely their major emphasis, and so it's sort of like Free League. For some of their games will have a few supplements, and for others will have a ton. And Star Trek has a ton, plus an organized play program that was there, and so a lot of options, a lot of ways that you can try that out, which is cool.
Yeah. And one of the cool things is the settings that they're using are very diverse and
Mm.
would seem like a good escape from a typical fantasy. They used this system originally, I think, for Conan,
Huh, okay.
and I think they lost the license for that, so it's gone now.
Hmm.
Uh, and I don't know if it was as well loved as a fantasy uh, setting system than it is for Fallout, Star Trek.
Yeah.
Achtung Cthulhu, I played, but as a Fate game. But that
Sure.
is an amazing setting of what happens if in World War II the Nazis actually have eldritch power as well as military might, and
Yeah.
you're fighting that. So that's a great system. Yeah, I mentioned John Carter of Mars and
Yeah.
these other systems. So if you're looking for let's get away from the fantasy for a while and get into the sci-fi or some other genres, this may be something that you would like to look into.
Yeah. Awesome. Glad we did it.
Yeah, I'm glad we did it too. So, anything else, Teos, before we mosey on into the sunset?
No, I mean, I'll just reiterate. I really love those different things between each of the games. Like, I have a lot of respect for people who can think through how to make a particular, like build your own house, right? For Dune, like that's a neat angle. That
Mhm.
I love it when companies are willing to just sit back and think, okay, for this setting, what should we do differently? And that's neat.
Absolutely. So, thank you, Teos, for sharing your experiences with Dune and
Mm.
all your knowledge of the news, as always,
And Star Wars.
and Star Trek Wars. And thank you out there to our listeners. If you are still listening and not rage screaming at the speaker as you listen or watch, thank you for helping us out by listening to our words. And to our patrons who support us on Patreon at patreon.com/masteringdnd. We thank you for your support. If you're a Master of Dungeon supporters, we appreciate what you're doing for us. Master of Realm supporters, you are listed in our show notes. And to the Masters of the Multiverse, y'all are going to hear about it right now from Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Craig Bailey, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Evil John, DM Chad, Darren Chandler, Seth Eckel, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon, Nathan Fuller, The Mighty Jerd, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Shawn Hurst, Chad Jackson, Brian King, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Chad Lench, the Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, the Micro Ant, Sean Malley, Falcon Neal, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Ross Sandberg, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simose, David Somerville from Prismatics.com, the 5e space opera setting. Joe Tyler, James Walton, and Graham Ward. Thank you so much. If you would like to become a patron of the show, we would so appreciate it. It really does fire us up, helps us pay for hosting, and just gives us an overall warm feeling glow. I get the big whiskey when we get new patrons, so that's important. You can become a patron by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also support us by going to Apple Podcasts and subscribing, or going to YouTube and subscribing, or leaving us a review via those two platforms. So just commenting in general on what you like. So Teos, I know you just put out something new because I got an email while we were recording. So what's going on in Alpha Stream land?
Oh, you can find at alphastream.org my article that looks at the top selling book scan numbers, the top selling settings, accessories, source books, and what that kind of means and how it compares historically to things like TSR. And there's some pretty interesting stuff there. Later this week, I'll publish another piece as well. So it's been a lot of fun to dig into this book scan data.
Great.
Really interesting historical perspectives that I'm glad we have, especially because it's all going to change if there's more and more direct sales. So this is kind of like the time, that you can really look at it before who knows what the sales are that they're making through D&D Beyond or Virtual Tabletop or whatever. It'll get harder and harder. I'm glad we get this little window into it.
That's true. And you can find all of that at alphastream.org. You can find me on Twitter, on Mastodon, on Blue Sky. Just look for Shawn Merwin, or on most of those platforms, just look for Mastering Dungeons or Mastering D&D, and you'll find us all there. Or you can go to our YouTube channel, the special Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel. So Teos, we've 2D20'd. We've been to the Star Trek and we've been to the Dune. And what are we going to do now?
I'm going to set my phasers on stun for the rest of the day because that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, and I'm going to go fill myself with spice.